The diagnostic criteria for ADHD was based initially on hyperactive and impulsive elementary school aged boys. And more information has come out in research that supports the fact that girls are often missed even as younger children because they tend to be more people pleasers, teacher pleasers. They tend to try to pay attention as much as possible and try to do their best. So girls who are basically sort of intelligent and academically minded, who find school to some degree stimulating, because it's about stimulating your brain appropriately so you can pay attention. And for some students, school and learning is actually stimulating. But those that are also hyperactive, impulsive, and we call them the chatty Cathys, they have a harder time kind of containing themselves, and they'll be more sort of disruptive because they're chatting to their neighbor, or they're, not paying attention and maybe being a little disruptive for that reason. And there's some girls who are obsessive compulsive in their style or perfectionistic, and they like things a certain way. Those kids aren't going to be noticed probably until way into college or grad school. All those things kind of hide it or mask it from being noticeable. And then a lot of these individuals get to that level at a certain point we call hitting the ceiling. And that can happen in a really advanced high school curriculum, like with AP classes, or it can happen in college or grad school, where at some point it's like their intelligence is not sufficient to make up for this. That's when they start getting really stressed out. They work extra hard to compensate. They get burnt out and sometimes even depressed. Women who go through that will then be going to their doctor saying, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, and the doctor will hear anxiety and treat the anxiety rather than the underlying untreated ADHD. So a lot of times people are misdiagnosed and mistreated all through their life as women. Now, ADHD is highly heritable, and it is passed through both mothers and fathers. You're born with it and you die with it, but over your lifetime, it can be exacerbated by changes in different levels of hormones across your lifespan. So for women, as they reach puberty, they actually get more ADD. And then when they get pregnant, it improves. And then when they later on are going through perimenopause and menopause, it gets worse again because the lack of estrogen will exacerbate the subclinical or less sort of significant ADHD and kind of push it over to the edge, which is why I identify a lot of women in midlife. So if the individual has been missed earlier in life, what will happen is by the time they reach that perimenopausal stage and their estrogen levels become more depleted, it is often a stage of their life when they have even more overwhelming demands on them. So many times they have children themselves that they're raising, multiple children, each one exponentially adds to the amount they have to keep track of. Then they often have aging parents that they're trying to assist as well. Then they could be, if they're a working woman, at the pinnacle of their career and having a lot of demands in the workplace that also overwhelm them, running a household. So you throw all that on top of them. And while they could manage when they had only one child or before they had kids, now that you pile all that on them and their estrogen levels are depleting, that's when they reach that threshold of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. I'm getting early Alzheimer's, something is wrong with me. And that's when they go into the doctor complaining of stress and overwhelm. If the doctor's knowledgeable, they'll send them to me to get diagnosed or somebody else who can assess that piece of it. So many women in midlife are overwhelmed even if they don't have ADHD, but the difference is that there is a neurological sort of pattern that can be identified when you do a sort of retroactive developmental history, which is how I would go about diagnosing a woman in midlife, is I would trace it back all the way to elementary school and talk about some of the symptom profiles and patterns that existed way back then, even though they may not have been identified or have risen to the level of being, a big impact on her. Often there's subtle impacts, and often it's at a cost that these women succeed academically as well as in life, in the workplace, et cetera. It's through extra hard work, staying extra long hours at the workplace, or not having a social life when they're in college because they have to spend all their time keeping up with the academics. So there's usually a hidden cost there, but generally it's going to get worse for this population than it would for the non-ADD population. And they wouldn't have had the history of these same issues going way back that can be traced. So it's sort of putting lots of puzzle pieces together and identifying whether there was sort of pre-existing ADHD. One doesn't acquire ADHD midlife. One can get overwhelmed with too many demands, just like anybody, but it is sort of a different flavor for women that actually have undiagnosed, untreated ADHD, that it takes somebody who's really familiar with it to kind of tease that out. That's why a lot of doctors end up giving them an SSRI, anti-anxiety, antidepressant medication, rather than recognizing that there may be something other than that that's contributing to it. It's never too late to be diagnosed. I have women coming in their 70s, believe it or not. So I encourage you, if you are struggling and this sounds like you, that you really talk to your doctor and let them know that you suspect it's ADHD, especially if you have any relatives with it, or you really identify with the symptoms when you start researching what they are. I would sort of be a good advocate for yourself and just say to your doctor, I really need you to refer me to somebody to diagnose this, because I'm suspecting that this might be why I'm getting so anxious or stressed or overwhelmed. And the most important thing is to prioritize you, because so many women are pulled in so many directions, taking care of everybody else, that they put themselves last. So one of my biggest messages to you is to put yourself first, because if you don't put gas in your own tank, you can't take care of everybody else. So it's so important that you find the treatments that work for you, and that you get the help you need, and that you get the sleep you need, the exercise you need, the downtime you need, in order to function, optimally, so that you can give to everybody else in your life. So putting yourself first is my top message to women.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you all enjoyed this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel for other great content created by me and the Katie Couric Media team.